Video game development is hard and weird. Games can be expensive, time-consuming, and complex to make. However, one thing that can be helpful in the modern day is the use of many tried and true game design fundamentals. So many games have been made that you can find a genre-defining title around almost every corner. But what if the entire games industry got flipped on its head, and all those established fundamentals were thrown out the window? Welcome to the Wild West that was early 3D game development. Leading up to the major 3D console generation, Nintendo and Sega were still on top. While competitors would try to release to market like the 3DO and Atari Jaguar, none would capture general audiences quite like the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo. These two consoles were viciously competing and were both selling well during the early 90s. They were the kings of 16-bit gaming, and helped showcase some of the strongest games the industry would see. However, by the mid-90s, both of these consoles were starting to look outdated. The advent of 3D gaming would quickly arrive, and with this new generation, a new set of consoles would soon follow. Sony was a company that always had interest in the games industry. Though initially through small endeavors like publishing some of their own titles, they would also help create the sound chip that was used in the Super Nintendo. This partnership would lead to the two companies having a good relationship. And when they decided to create a CD add-on for their 16-bit console to compete with Sega's Sega CD, they initially approached Sony. As such, Sony and Nintendo began drafting the early versions of their CD-based console that would be known as the PlayStation. While being sold as a console in and of itself, it would also be available as an expansion for the Super Nintendo. However, things would quickly fall apart between the two companies, leading Nintendo to switch to using Sony's rival, Philips. This infuriated Sony's higher-ups to such a degree that they decided to go ahead and pursue development of their own console. Thanks to Nintendo's arrogance, Sony was so angry that they would end up creating the console that would completely obliterate them going forward, and arguably define the upcoming games industry. Releasing in 1994 in Japan and 1995 worldwide, the Sony PlayStation would be a huge hit and dominate this era of video games. Sony would reach out to a wide variety of different game developers and publishers to make sure that their platform had some of the best and most iconic titles of all time, even at launch. The PlayStation had variety and quality, but with that variety came a slew of different franchises, and as a side effect, made it so that Sony struggled to find a mascot for the brand in an era where that was absolutely crucial. While many developers would throw their hat into the ring, none of them would quite reach the success that the PlayStation needed. It wouldn't be until Naughty Dog developed one game for the PlayStation that finally gave Sony the mascot they desperately needed: Crash Bandicoot. I don't know if I've ever talked about this, but the first time I ever played Crash Bandicoot 1 on PS1 was at my fucking daycare. They had a PS1 for the little gamer snot children. So me, the only game I cared about seeing on that PS1 was this, because I was watching stuff on my family computer about Crash Bandicoot back in the day, and I had Crash 2 and 3, and I had CTR, which I got from a friend who didn't want them anymore. I've always wanted to play Crash 1. I never played it. It looked so different from all the other games in the series, and I really wanted to play it. Lo and behold, they had it there. I got 2 stages in before some other booger kid came in and was like, "I want the PS1. Get off!" I'm like, alright, well, guess I'm not playing this anymore. It's cool to experience Crash while it lasted. Before developing for the PlayStation, Naughty Dog was known for a variety of different titles, and were actually one of the more important developers on the 3DO. In 1994, Naughty Dog was finishing up their work on one of these titles, known as Way of the Warrior, a game that would receive pretty poor reviews. This was as homegrown of a game as you could get. The budget for this project was extremely low. While they wanted to use digitized graphics for the title, they didn't have the equipment that the bigger games like Mortal Kombat would. Instead, they would do things like buy their own screen and nail it to their apartment wall to capture footage for their game characters. Way of the Warrior was a really important title for Naughty Dog at the time, as co-founders Andy Gavin and Jason Rubin had just left EA to pursue their own creative endeavors, feeling stifled by the creative control EA demanded over them. Jason would then found his own special effects company, working on the film Wolf, while Andy pursued a PhD from MIT. That is, until EA founder Trip Hawkins approached the two of them about developing for the 3DO. The console appealed to both developers, as it utilized disc-based games, which were much more readily available and easy to produce than cartridge-based titles. It probably also helps that they were offered free development kits as well. And so, with the money gained from the previous titles that they had developed, they began creating Way of the Warrior exclusive to the 3DO. The production of this game was so low budget that they used pillowcases and costume store outfits for their characters. Again, at release, while initial reviews seemed relatively positive, that would quickly shift to a slew of negative reviews from various outlets due to the game's poor controls and lackluster gameplay. However, the game would wind up selling relatively well, even outselling SNK's port of Samurai Showdown. And so, as this title began to wrap up, ideas for a new title from Jason and Andy began stirring. 3D games were just really starting to make their debut. You would mostly see good 3D developed games in the arcade, but one genre that hadn't really been touched yet publicly was the 3D platformer. Both developers began stirring up ideas for what a 3D platforming title could potentially look like. During this time, when this game had been brainstormed, the publishing rights for Way of the Warrior were sold over to Universal Studios Interactive. This wound up putting Andy and Jason into the good graces of Universal, and they quickly asked the duo to come to the Universal Studios lot. They would essentially give them a free place to stay, as well as pay for their utilities, with the only caveat being whatever they created, they wanted to be able to see. A deal like that is pretty hard to pass up, and so Andy, Jason, and the titular Naughty Dog, Morgan, began the trip across the country to move to the Universal Studios lot. And here, their concept for the 3D platformer would come to fruition. Well, I'm fucking snapping the disc in half. That was a good stream. Glow, do you think if Crash Bandicoot was real, he would be good friends with Richtofen? I feel like Crash Bandicoot would hate Richtofen. He'd remind him of Cortex, and then he'd murder him with a rock. And he'd be screaming "whoa" the entire time he does it. Why is this weird version of Crash Bandicoot in my head? His main attack is rock. Crush, rock. My version of Crash is just fucked up, man. Don't scare him, he'll beat you to death with a rock. Alright, hold on, I gotta focus. I gotta stop talking about Crash Bandicoot beating people to death with rocks. Can I get in trouble on... What is with me tonight? This is a consistent topic. Can I get in trouble on Twitch for talking about a fictional character deciding to beat me to death with a rock? If anybody hears me mention anything about Crash Bandicoot and rocks again, just fucking... It's time to put me in the home, okay? Fun times for video games right now. If AI started making video games, I'd probably beat them to death with a rock. I'd run into the server room of every major game publishing studio and just start smashing it with a rock. I'd have Crash Bandicoot with me. He'd help me beat the servers to death with a rock. The iguana is too powerful. Quick, Crash, take out your trusty rock. You know what to do. Did you guys know about Crash Bandicoot's secret rock attack? Shit! Quick, Crash, you can't make this jump. Take out your rock! The duo began thinking up ideas for how a player's camera would follow the main character. The most logical option seemed to be to have the camera directly behind the player at all times. However, there is also the question of, well, what if you wanted the player to see the main character's expression and movements? It'd be pretty hard if you were constantly looking at the character's ass. And so, with their new working title of Sonic's Ass Game, the team thought of a couple different concepts for what they could potentially do with the 3D game. Maybe they could have a stage where the character runs towards the camera. Or maybe they could even have a stage that's more similar to how a 2D game would be, with a side-scrolling perspective. During this period, 2 more members would start working on this game as well, one being Dave Baggett, a very talented programmer and friend of the duo. Another critical person that would join this team would be Mark Cerny, the VP of Universal Interactive at the time. Mark Cerny was a very important name within the Sega Technical Institute throughout the 90s. He played a critical role in getting Sonic 2 to shelves, and was well known and well regarded within the American Sega branch. Mark was already very well respected during this time, and his talent with game design was already well known. However, his future work with PlayStation would help propel him more into the mainstream, as many of you might know him for being one of the lead designers on the PlayStation 4 and 5. As this team continued brainstorming this new 3D character platformer, a critical question continued to rise. What platform should this game ship on? Now, the 3DO was a system that the team had already had experience developing for. However, it was well known that the 3DO was not performing well at all. Shipping a game on this platform could be extremely detrimental to sales. On top of that, its 3D capabilities, despite it being in the name of the console, was actually extremely poor. So the idea of the title shipping on the 3DO went out the window very quickly. There was also the Atari Jaguar, which, I mean, come on. So they weren't developing it for the Atari Jaguar. Now, it was known that Nintendo was working on a new platform that more than likely would support 3D games, but there wasn't any way of actually finding out any sort of specs or getting development hardware for this team. Nintendo had a habit of being extremely secretive during this time, so not enough was known about it to even actually consider it a reasonable platform to develop for. So, out of the known big development studios, Sega was really the only one that currently had a platform that seemed like it was open for development. Sega had the 32X, which was already seeming to not be a great platform to work with at this point. It was very obvious to the team that the 32X was simply just an add-on for the Genesis, and not its own system. And that simply wasn't very exciting. The other major console that was in the wheelhouse for development was the Sega Saturn. This was Sega's new next-gen platform. The problem with this platform came from its unique hybrid build. It was complicated to work with, and the dev units that were being shipped out weren't something that supported a very smooth development process. So the team seemed to have a bit of a struggle here. What platform could this new game be developed for? It seemed like all the major game publishers were having issues one way or another with their platforms to develop for. So what was their best option? Well, there was one final choice for the team to make. You see, this would be the generation that a newcomer would properly enter the console market: Sony. Sony was known for having a variety of different high-end home electronics, specifically their high-end music devices. Sony was still considered one of the cool companies at the time, and it just so happens that they were actually going to be attempting to create their own video game console. Not much was known about this concept at the time, but the team had heard it was a very powerful 3D development platform. It seemed like an interesting choice, and after a lot of work, they managed to get a development kit for Sony's new platform, the PlayStation. This was far and away the easiest and most interesting option for development for this title. This platform was built for 3D. That's not to say it couldn't handle 2D, but it was very obvious from even the small introductory view that the team was taking at the machine that this platform could handle 3D better than the competition, and this would be the perfect platform for their new 3D character platformer. Little did they know, this would have been the best possible choice for them at the time, for reasons beyond just the game's development. What you doing if Crash Bandicoot comes out the screen and beats you to death? But we're talking about that in the tense that Crash Bandicoot has already successfully done it, so die, I guess. But if Crash Bandicoot came out of the screen and tried to beat me to death, I would whip out the Wii U and hit him over the head with it. Which would only work until he takes out his trusty rock and beats me to death with it. This is the weirdest running gag I've ever had on stream. Ah, yes. The best joke. Crash Bandicoot beating people to death with a rock. I'm gonna fucking die, dude. Ah! I love Crash Bandicoot. I wish he was real so he could beat me to death with a rock right now. What the fuck? I know! Are you kidding me? I went through all that. I fell in between the dude. All right, Crash Bandicoot, I'm gonna beat you to. I can't say that. Twitch is gonna get mad at me. It doesn't care that's a fictional orange Bandicoot. Twitch is gonna beat me to death with a rock. I hate you, Crash Bandicoot! I hate you! Something that the team really wanted to work on for this game was taking a lot of inspiration from Donkey Kong Country. This game was still relatively new at the time, and was a personal favorite of Andy and Jason's. Jumping, time challenges, collectibles, these are all ideas for how the game would function, but the other major thing that they really wanted to work on was to create a really unique and iconic mascot character for the game. Something the team really loved was those fluid classic Looney Tunes cartoons. They wanted to have a character that would have a very wide range of expressions with a very cartoony movement and animation style. The additional hope with creating a character like this was that maybe, just maybe, Sony would take notice and really grow attached to this character. While Mario was Nintendo and Sonic was Sega, there wasn't really anything yet for Sony. That's not to say they didn't try their own mascots, but can you really name one Sony mascot that came before Crash Bandicoot? There was Polygon Man, which nobody knew, and they used some of the characters from Battle Arena Toshinden. But this just wasn't really sticking for Sony. These characters were not iconic enough to compete with the likes of Sonic and Mario. So, although being potentially overly hopeful, the team had a little sliver of hope that this could be Sony's new mascot. However, first and foremost, they were interested in developing a really great character for their own game. Creating a character like this was going to take a lot of work, but to start, they were going to need to come up with the main character as well as its supporting cast. They wanted to take the idea that the Tasmanian Devil and Sonic the Hedgehog introduced. The concept of showcasing an animal that many general audiences potentially wouldn't recognize. Some of the initial ideas were a Potoroo, Wombat, and finally a Bandicoot. And so, with this idea, their main character for their brand new mascot platformer was born. The ever iconic, and soon to be easily recognized, Willy the Wombat. Yep, during development, this character was a wombat. And while Willy was more than likely never meant to be the final name, it was the one they went with throughout most of development. It was believed that no matter what, a marketing department would more than likely choose the final name for the character. So sure, Willy the Wombat, that was good enough. They wanted Willy to feel like a Looney Tunes character. However, something they really wanted to have with the game was to make sure that the main character didn't speak. He was gonna be fun and goofy. The team felt like having him talk would take away from that somewhat. Next up, the main villain. The idea started while the team was out eating at, supposedly, an Italian restaurant near Universal. You see, Andy had always wanted a cartoonish villain with a big head. Him being an evil genius fit this concept perfectly. Jason had really liked the characters from Pinky and the Brain. So the idea became a more malevolent version of Brain, that would have his own minions, inspired by the weasels from Who Framed Roger Rabbit. This would all fit that energetic, slapstick cartoon style that they were looking for. Now, the team knew that they wanted this very heavy cartoon style, but how could they get art that would represent this? They decided to go a really unique route. You see, the fact that they were working with Universal meant that they had more Hollywood talent to pull on. While yes, the team was still small, the proximity of the talent they were working with helped them a ton. The idea of using Hollywood-like production development came from Mark Cerny, and is very clear to the team just how important this would be for the game's development. This would actually become more of a standard as game development would continue to progress over the years. And so, the team brought on Charles Zimbillas, primarily for character design, and Joe Pearson, primarily for background design. The work created by these two would be fundamental and essential to creating the world and feel of this all-new title. Without them, more than likely, the game would have an extremely different feel, and it would have struggled much harder to get that classic Looney Tunes style. You can see the incredible talent these two brought to the table with the concept art showcased here. And at this point, I might as well just fucking reset the PS2. Alright, we're down to one life. Bro, can you get past the first jump? Look, alright, I gotta get back in the groove. I haven't played Crash Bandicoot in like 2 weeks. Like, give me a break, okay? You do it! Alright, smart guy, let's see you take a crack at it. Fuck! This game's hard. Just steal shit. You died, by the way. Alright, well, I don't need the fucking play-by-play, John Madden. Alright, I know. I'm well aware. Alright. Let's do this. I can't. Go. 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 Yeah! Give me that key! Get your ass out of here! Yeah! Slap his big ass fucking forehead, take that key, and teleport the fuck out of there. Kick his ass, Crash! Quick, Crash, jump him! Get the rock! Bust out the rock, Crash. Now's the time. Your iconic move. Beat him to death with a rock. While this incredible design work was being made, the team was also attempting to solve the various technical hurdles presented by the PlayStation. One such way they took advantage of the hardware's capabilities to overcome this came from the use of flat, untextured polygons. This was an idea brought up by Jason. The low-resolution textures typically didn't look the best on the PS1, and took a lot for the machine to render. However, the machine was able to render flat, shaded polygons at a relatively fast rate. Some other techniques the team used to get the look they were aiming for was vertex animation, where instead of utilizing bones, they would manually store each vertex location at 30 frames per second. This made the animation far more cartoony and less stilted. Mark Cerny actually created a complex assembly language compressor just for this, alongside Andy and Dave. Andy, Jason, and Dave also realized to create these gorgeous, lush worlds for the PS1, they would need to create visibility pre-calculations. It was a tool that was extremely impressive for the time, and worked well so long as you weren't showing more than 800 polygons on screen. With a lot of the technical work down, the main goal now needed to be making this character move in a 3D space in a fun and great feeling way. While the team had definitely worked on game controls before, making a character move in a 3D space for a platform game was always going to be a tough challenge. You have to remember that during this time, there were little to no examples of good, successful 3D platformers. Much less any that were able to hold up beyond the present day that they were made in. There were multiple iterations made of the character controls, with a lot of internal critiques. Some of these being that the character should be able to jump a frame or two after walking over an edge, or that the character speed was just too slow. These were just some examples of critiques that were then implemented into the final control design. While it took a variety of different iterations, Eventually, the team would land on a control scheme that they felt worked well for the game. Next, the team would need to work on level design. This was yet another major hurdle that became a struggle to pass, as again, there was little to no reference here, with 3D game development being so new. The way that these levels would need to be designed would have to be completely rethought from the standard fundamentals presented by 2D games. The initial 2 levels that were developed completely fell flat for the team. They had a variety of different technical issues and simply were not fun to play. A lot of time was spent trying to figure out how to get a level design in 3D to work well. And even still, the 2 levels that they were able to create were not fun, and had such glaring issues that there was no way they would be able to ship. The game would struggle to have a solid idea of what its level design would be, and as such, not many levels, if any at all, were being finalized. That is, until Mark Cerny stepped in and had the team focus on creating a solid level design that utilized a lot of the 2D fundamentals that the team knew from the time. And so the first really finalized level would instead be a 2D level. This level in the final game would be Heavy Machinery. It was the first stage from the game that felt like it actually worked, was playable, and more importantly, was very fun to get through. The next properly designed level from the team would become Generator Room. This was the first stage that the team worked on that actually did utilize the 3D elements of the game, albeit in more simplistic ways. However, this stage's completion helped get the ball rolling for the rest of the stages in the game, and really helped to show the team exactly what worked with 3D level design. The team was also able to refine Willie's controls even further, making him work better when properly designed for 3D stages. Now, with the game finally reaching a point where levels were being properly designed, there was another issue the team was running into. These stages were very empty, the interactables were very slim, and while the team had come up with the idea of collecting Wumpa Fruit as you get through the stages, ultimately that's just the equivalent of Sonic's rings or Mario's coins. They're not a huge incentive to really explore or go out of your way to do things in stages, and a lot of players would simply just run past them, or collect the minimum amount they felt they needed. This game needed something more to really push these levels into feeling like fully fleshed stages. The problem was with their really high poly character and stage designs. There weren't a lot of options for additional items that could be added to stages. The team needed to think of something low poly that could be fun to interact with and wouldn't stress the PlayStation to an extreme degree. During one of Jason and Andy's drives to work, which, by the way, during this time, they were typically working from 10 AM to 4 AM. 7 days a week. The duo finally came up with a solution to this problem. What item could possibly be a lower poly and still easily be readable by players than a crate? You could do a ton of different things with crates. They came up with different ideas, such as exploding ones, ones that drop, and ones that bounce. And on top of that, they could hold all sorts of different stuff within them. This was a perfect solution to their problem, and where the iconic crates from the game came from. On that Saturday, when they arrived to work, they began implementing a variety of different crate designs, and that next week after, they were placing them into their levels. If you stream Gort, I will join you on the dot. I should do another, just anybody can join Gort night again. Those are always fun. I have to haul my fucking PS5 upstairs, and ugh. That's the main problem. Why are you acting like your PS5 is the size of a fridge? What do you mean haul it up the stairs? Dude! What? That fucking thing is the size of a fridge! That is the size of a mini fridge. I love the PS5. I've enjoyed the shit out of that console. That thing is massive. It is the biggest console ever. It's bigger than the original Xbox. What do you mean? Haul it up, of course I mean haul it up the stairs. That thing's fucking huge. Why are you acting like I'm crazy? I'm not crazy. You're crazy. PS5 is bigger than the Series X, and the Series X is huge. I like how before the console came out, everybody was joking haha, router. That would be the biggest fucking router in existence. You'd be having a super router.
Your fucking ancestors would be getting internet.
By this point, it was around the winter of 1995. The game was finally starting to shape up into what it would become, and was really showcasing the strengths of this game's current design. While many of the people who saw the game thought that the title was extremely impressive, one big company who really needed to see the game by this point still hadn't seen it, that being Sony. Sony didn't require publishers to review the games released on the platform with Sony, as they believed that obviously publishers would need to review these titles before release. However, Andy asked one member of the team, Taylor Kurosaki, to edit the footage that they had for the game into a small 2-minute reel. They then leaked this reel to Sony in the hopes that they would take notice of the title. Not only did they take notice of it, but they were supremely impressed and wanted to publish the game themselves. And so a deal was struck between Universal and Sony for them to publish the title. At this point, while not officially, Crash had pretty much become PlayStation's new mascot character. However, with this lofty title, it meant that this game would have some extreme competition coming directly from Nintendo. The same year that Crash would release, Nintendo was finally gearing up to bring out their next generation console, and they had their own 3D platformer game in development, Super Mario 64. Not much was known about the game at this time, and while games like Tomb Raider were releasing, the team wasn't worried about that game competing with Crash, as they were going for completely different audiences, whereas Mario was going to be directly competing with Crash Bandicoot. Of course, this character wasn't named Crash Bandicoot just yet. However, the team did know that they needed to change the name. Willy the Wombat just wasn't sticking, and the team did know that they wanted a Bandicoot by this point. However, the exact name hadn't been decided yet. The team came up with a few different names, like Smash or Bash, just due to how you destroyed the crates in the levels. But ultimately, they decided on Crash Bandicoot, as the name just seemed to work well. The team did have to fight for this name, however. Universal had decided to bring in a toy marketer to come up with a name for the game. The names chosen by said marketer, Wuzzle the Wombat and Ozzy the Otzel, were rejected by the developers outright. After a revolt by the development team, eventually the name Crash Bandicoot stuck. Now the major hurdle that the team would need to pass is that of the E3 demo. The event was coming up, and Nintendo had to be showing their new Mario 64. This was going to be a very important landmark moment, not just for Crash Bandicoot, but for the PlayStation as a whole, and Crash needed to have a strong showing. The music for the title wasn't even worked on up until this point. It was very much a last-minute issue. Quickly, a team that included the soon-to-be trilogy musician, Josh Mansell, was formed, and production on the game's music began. E3 soon came around, and Crash Bandicoot made its public debut to very positive reception from the press. However, the other major game during this E3 was Mario 64. Both games were extremely impressive in providing different outlooks of how 3D platformers could work in this, at the time, modern era of gaming. The games were always compared side by side, primarily due to the fact that Sega didn't really have a good 3D platformer of their own. There wasn't anything that they were providing that could compete with the likes of Crash and Mario. So, as such, Sony and Nintendo were very much the dominant forces during this E3. And this put Crash in the limelight, as it was the direct competitor to Nintendo's 3D platforming solution. Ultimately, E3 wound up being a major success for the game, bringing in a lot of attention to the title, and with one final push towards the end of the development, Crash Bandicoot would release in September of 1996 for Sony's PlayStation.
Sorry, by the way, if I'm missing messages. I won! We did it! We beat Crash 1! You like Microsoft. You died, by the way. Nope! Not anymore! We beat Crash! We beat Crash 1! We did it!
The game would obviously be met with widespread praise. However, it couldn't help but be compared to Mario 64. These games were both trying to achieve very different things. but Mario 64 seemed like the far more impressive title due to it being more of a open level structure. However, even during this time, many reviewers could see the appeal and difference that Crash Bandicoot brought. It offered a more direct adaptation of the 2D beginning to end level design. It provides its own unique flavor of how to handle 3D platforming game development. And there wasn't anything like Crash Bandicoot at the time either. These were both great titles that were offering different things. And while again, most of the reviews were positive, there were a few who negatively compared Crash Bandicoot to Mario 64. Obviously, in hindsight, this is a pretty unfair comparison, but during the time, you could see why some reviewers would see it like that. Crash Bandicoot, sales-wise, was selling well. However, it wasn't the smash-out hit that you would think the original Crash Bandicoot game would be. At launch, it rented well from Blockbuster, and ultimately did end up on the charts for PlayStation. But the success of Crash Bandicoot sales-wise didn't come from its initial launch sales. Instead, it came from the fact that the game just didn't slow down sales-wise. Crash Bandicoot continued to sell, and wouldn't have the stark drop-off that you would expect to see from a lot of titles after launch. As such, the game would consistently rank at the top of sales charts for the PlayStation 1's entire lifespan, and would become a staple in many PlayStation owners' collections. Even with the good, but not incredible sales at launch, it was very clear to see that Crash Bandicoot's sales were not slowing down, and a sequel would be inevitable. However, one thing that was for sure was that Naughty Dog's attempt at a 3D platformer was a massive success. The work done by the team and the incredible innovations they brought to the PlayStation platform made this game a staple part of the PlayStation 1's history. It helped to propel the PlayStation as the premier 3D gaming machine, and would create a long legacy of 3D platformers inspired by it. Crash Bandicoot paved the way for Sony to become the dominant force within the games industry that it currently is. And without it, it's hard to see Sony, and more importantly the PlayStation, as the king of gaming that many would say it is now. And it all started with a car ride across the country between two friends and their dog.